In just 72 hours, J.D. Vance faced a brutal nationwide mockery that shattered his world. A storm of scorn and ridicule broadcast across millions of screens, shaking everything he believed about himself and the country he vowed to serve. But what happened next wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of fighting fire with fire, J.D. made a choice, one that brought millions to tears and challenged the very meaning of courage in America today. This is a story of resilience, of grace under pressure, and of a man who refused to let bitterness define him. While the names and moments you're about to hear are inspired by real emotions and truths, this narrative blends fact with fiction, crafted to illuminate the human spirit beyond politics and headlines. It's not just about what happened, it's about what it means to rise, to forgive, and to inspire a nation when the world is watching. So as we dive into J.D. Vance's journey from the edge of despair to a powerful act of gratitude, ask yourself, could one person's unexpected response really change how we think about strength? And what might that teach each of us about the courage it takes to lead, not just with power, but with heart? Stay with us. This story has the power to move you, inspire you, and remind us all what it truly means to rise. The city lights outside twinkled softly through the rain-speckled window of the dimly lit hotel room, but inside the air was heavy with an unspoken tension. J.D. Vance sat alone on the edge of a modest bed, the exhaustion of a grueling campaign day weighing down every muscle. The muffled sounds of distant traffic filtered through the thin walls, but in here, silence reigned. A silence that pressed against him like a weight. His phone buzzed sharply, slicing through the quiet like a sudden clap of thunder. He reached for it without hesitation, his fingers trembling just slightly. The message was brief from his trusted aide. "You need to watch this now." His eyes narrowed as he unlocked the screen, the glow illuminating his sharp features in the darkened room. The clip began to play. Jimmy Kimmel's voice rang out, crisp and biting, echoing through the small speakers. The late-night host stood confidently on his stage, bathed in harsh studio lights, delivering a monologue laced with sarcasm and cutting humor, aimed squarely at J.D. The words hit hard, mocking J.D.'s loyalty to Donald Trump as flip-flopping, ridiculing his blue-collar roots as mere performance, and exposing contradictions J.D. had carefully tried to bury beneath his public image. Each jab was precise and relentless, delivered with a smile that never reached Kimmel's eyes. The laughter from the studio audience was a cold wave washing over J.D.'s chest, sinking into him deeper than he expected. His heart raced, a sharp spike of adrenaline piercing through the fatigue. The mockery was more than political banter. It felt personal, a raw public unveiling of every vulnerability. J.D.'s gaze flickered to the window, where the city seemed indifferent, lights blinking on as if unaware of the storm unfolding inside this small room. He swallowed hard, his throat dry as the clip continued, Kimmel's words cutting like a knife through the carefully maintained armor J.D. had spent years forging. The laughter, the smirks, the pointed insinuations, all etched themselves onto J.D.'s mind with vivid clarity. For a moment, the room seemed to close in. The once comforting glow of his phone's screen now cast harsh shadows across his face, revealing the flicker of doubt behind his steely eyes. Memories surged up, of childhood taunts, of nights when his mother held back tears to protect him from the world's cruelty, of a young boy promising himself to be stronger, to never be broken. J.D. clenched his fists, the cool metal of the hotel room's radiator pressing against his skin as if anchoring him to the present. The clip ended with a sharp final punchline that drew uproarious laughter. The room fell silent again, but the echo of mockery lingered like smoke in the air. His mind raced. The campaign speeches, the policy debates, the endless public scrutiny, all paled against this brutal exposure. J.D. knew that millions had seen this, that this moment would ripple far beyond this room. The question pressing down on him was clear, unforgiving. How would he answer the world when every eye was on him? Could he rise above the jeers, or would this moment define him? Outside, the city continued its restless dance, unaware, uncaring. Inside, J.D. Vance sat motionless, caught between the harsh light of public judgment and the shadowed quiet of his own resolve. The battle was no longer just for votes or ideals. It was for dignity, for identity, for the very soul of a man and the country he sought to represent. The silence that had settled in J.D. Vance's hotel room was shattered within hours by a digital storm. The clip of Jimmy Kimmel's sharp and unforgiving monologue was no longer confined to late-night television. It exploded across every screen, every device, and every social platform. Memes mocking JD's every move flooded feeds. The hashtag hillbilly hypocrite surged into trending lists, bouncing between viral videos and heated debates. From small-town diners in Ohio to bustling cafes in New York, the conversation was unavoidable. JD's campaign staff gathered in a makeshift war room, faces lit by the pale glow of laptops and smartphones. Tensions were high. "We have to hit back," one advisor insisted, scrolling through dozens of fiery tweets. "This could ruin him. If we don't respond fast and hard, the narrative is lost." But JD sat silently in the corner, arms crossed, his gaze distant. The room buzzed around him, but inside he wrestled with a storm far more personal. Pride battled restraint, anger pressed against his better judgment, and a long-buried ache stirred deep within. His mind drifted unwillingly back to memories of childhood. The sharp laughter of schoolyard bullies, the whispered insults behind closed doors, and most painfully, the nights when his mother's quiet sobs seeped through the thin walls of their small home. He remembered her wiping away tears in the darkness, pretending everything was fine so that he wouldn't lose hope. That hope, fragile and stubborn, had been the foundation of everything JD had built. Yet now, with the world watching, that foundation felt shaken. The staff's voices grew louder, their strategies more desperate, but JD's silence stretched like a gulf between them. He understood the urgency. The campaign's survival depended on how he reacted now. Yet the simple impulse to lash out or defend himself gnawed at him like a restless shadow. Could he fight the fire with fire and keep his integrity intact? Or would the fight consume him? Humiliation wrapped around him, suffocating and relentless. The mockery wasn't just words on a screen anymore. It was a tangible weight, pressing on his chest with every notification, every retweet, every shared clip. Yet beneath the shame, there was a sense of being trapped by expectations, by the roles he was supposed to play, and by the invisible audience judging every move. As hours turned into night, the initial surge of social media frenzy only deepened. Late-night hosts echoed Kimmel's biting remarks. Opinion pieces dissected JD's past, scrutinized his every inconsistency, and questioned his authenticity. The viral wave showed no sign of abating. It was relentless, sweeping through news cycles and infiltrating conversations everywhere. Still, JD remained seated, alone in his thoughts. The bright screens around him seemed to blur, the noise of the outside world fading into a distant hum. He was forced to confront something deeper than public perception, the fragile core of who he was beneath the politician's armor. The moment felt like a crossroads. Would he respond with anger and retaliation, risking losing himself to the chaos? Or could he find a path that preserved his dignity, honored his past, and perhaps even redefined his future? The answer was not yet clear, but in that quiet room, amid the flickering glow of countless screens and the distant murmur of a world obsessed with spectacle, J.D. Vance faced his lowest point, humiliated, trapped, but not yet broken. The buzz of his phone had long since faded, and the hotel room was swallowed by darkness. Yet J.D. Vance found no rest. The storm unleashed by Jimmy Kimmel's monologue was still raging in his mind, relentless and unforgiving. Unable to stay confined within the sterile walls, he slipped out into the cool night air of Washington, D.C. The city was quieter now, but not silent. The faint hum of distant traffic blended with the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Street lamps cast long pools of amber light onto empty sidewalks, while the towering monuments loomed in solemn grandeur against the night sky. Each step JD took echoed in his chest like a heartbeat, steady and resolute. His thoughts drifted back to the winding road that had brought him here, from a childhood shadowed by poverty and struggle, to the bright, unforgiving spotlight of political power. He remembered the cramped apartments, the whispered prayers of his mother, the promise he'd made to himself to rise above it all. But now, faced with the weight of public mockery and the barrage of scrutiny, that promise felt fragile, almost distant. "Do I fight fire with fire?" he whispered into the night, his breath visible in the cold air. "Or find another way?" The question hung between him and the towering columns of the Capitol building, their white stone gleaming faintly beneath the moonlight. The tension of the day's events pressed on him, but so did a quiet determination, a flicker of something deeper than anger or pride. He walked slowly toward the National Mall, the familiar paths winding past the reflecting pool shimmering under the stars. The world seemed at peace here, away from cameras and headlines. Yet within JD, the turmoil continued, a battle between impulse and principle, between reaction and reflection. As he approached the Lincoln Memorial, its massive silhouette framed against the night sky, JD paused. The image of the seated president, solemn and strong, seemed to speak to him across time. It was a symbol of endurance, of leadership tested by adversity. JD's gaze fixed on the statue's stern face, and he felt a well of quiet strength rising from somewhere deep inside. The long journey had taught him many things: resilience, humility, and the power of grace in moments of trial. Now at this crossroads, he knew the choice before him was more than political strategy. It was about who he wanted to be when the cameras were off, when the noise faded. He took a deep breath, steadying himself against the chill. The night was vast and still, but within it, J.D. Vance found a clarity that had eluded him all day. The path wasn't easy, and the road ahead uncertain, but the answer lay not in matching mockery with mockery, but in choosing a strength that transcended conflict. With one last glance at the memorial, J.D. turned and began the walk back, carrying with him a resolve forged not in the heat of anger, but in the quiet cool of reflection. Tonight, the fight was no longer about proving others wrong. It was about proving to himself what kind of man he truly was. The cool night air of Washington had slowly faded into the early morning light as J.D. Vance found himself transported back to a time long before the bright lights and political battles, back to a small, crumbling house on the edge of a forgotten neighborhood. The memories were vivid and raw, like an old photograph faded but never fully erased. He was just a boy again, sitting quietly on a threadbare couch, watching his mother as she sat at the kitchen table. The room was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling, its light casting wavering shadows on peeling wallpaper stained with the passage of time. The furniture was worn, the floor creaked beneath every step, and the air carried the faint, sharp scent of dampness. His mother's hands trembled slightly as she clutched a worn envelope filled with bills, notices of overdue payments and threats of eviction. Her eyes, tired yet fierce, scanned each paper, absorbing the weight of a future uncertain and fraught with hardship. Though she tried to mask it with a brave smile, the strain was clear, etched into the lines of her face. Occasionally, she would pause, pressing her palm to her forehead, struggling to keep the worries from spilling over. Outside, faint laughter drifted through the thin walls from neighbors living just a few houses away. Their voices were carefree and bright, punctuated by the sound of children playing and doors opening to welcome guests. The contrast was stark and painful. While others celebrated the small comforts of life, J.D.'s family grappled with the fear of losing their home, their stability, their sense of safety. The echoes of those joyous sounds seemed to mock the quiet desperation within the house. J.D. could still hear the distant music and chatter that seemed like a world apart, a reminder of the life that felt just beyond reach. As a child, J.D. was too young to fully understand the weight his mother carried, but he saw enough. The hidden tears she wiped away when she thought no one was watching, the way her hands clenched tightly when the landlord's voice came through the door. He felt the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, yet beneath it all, a fierce determination burned quietly. In that fragile moment, sitting beside her worn hands and watching the stack of bills, J.D. made a silent promise. One day, he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the hum of the street outside, I'll be strong enough to defend us. It was not just a vow born from fear, but one forged in love, a promise to protect, to fight, and to rise above. That promise became a beacon, a guiding light through years of uncertainty and struggle. Every hardship, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt was tempered by that quiet strength growing inside him. Even now, as he walked the streets of Washington, the memory of that small house and his mother's resilience lingered like a shadow. Not to hold him back, but to remind him why the fight mattered. The laughter of the neighbors, once distant and mocking, had transformed in his mind into a call to action. JD understood that to honor that childhood vow, he needed to be more than just a politician. He had to be a protector of those who, like his family once did, faced the harshness of the world with quiet courage. And with that thought, JD lifted his eyes toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn began to chase away the darkness. The road ahead was uncertain, but the strength born from those childhood shadows was steady, unwavering. Back in the present, the weight of the viral mockery hung heavy in the air of J.D. Vance's campaign headquarters. The once quiet strategy room now buzzed with urgency and tension. His advisors crowded around a large table cluttered with laptops, coffee cups, and scribbled notes, their voices rising in fervent debate. "We need a response, fast, fierce, and unrelenting," one senior aide insisted, tapping furiously on a keyboard. "Jimmy Kimmel's attack is going to define this narrative if we don't hit back hard." Drafts of sharp rebuttals and biting talking points flashed across screens. "This is our moment to flip the script," another advisor said, eyes gleaming with resolve. "We need zingers that stick, something the media and donors can rally behind. JD can't afford to look weak now." Outside, the hum of social media chatter hadn't faded. Reporters and political commentators speculated endlessly on whether JD would strike back or retreat. Fundraisers demanded toughness. Voters expected strength. The pressure was palpable, a weight pressing down on JD from every angle. Yet amid the clamor and urgency, JD remained unusually quiet, sitting apart from the bustling energy. His jaw clenched subtly as he absorbed the room's intensity, but held a silent conflict beneath his calm exterior. Deep inside, a voice whispered caution, a quiet plea to consider more than just the heat of the moment. "I know what you all want," he finally spoke, his tone measured but firm. "But responding with anger might only feed the fire. We need to be smarter than the insult, not just louder." The room's energy shifted instantly. Murmurs rippled through the group, some skeptical, others contemplative. The internal battle between impulse and restraint grew more intense as advisors pushed for swift action, convinced that silence would be seen as weakness. JD's mind raced, recalling lessons from his past. The power of restraint, the strength in choosing one's battles carefully. The world expected him to retaliate, to defend his honor aggressively, but he sensed the cost that path might bring. As debate swirled around him, JD grappled with a question deeper than politics. Could grace under fire prove more powerful than fire itself? Could he respond in a way that preserved dignity, inspired respect, and changed the conversation? The tension in the room was a mirror to the storm inside JD, a battle between the instinct to fight back and the wisdom to rise above. Every moment ticked by with the pressure mounting, but in that charged silence, JD's resolve began to crystallize. His choice would not only shape his campaign, but define who he was beyond the headlines. And as the world watched, waiting for his move, J.D. Vance prepared to decide whether to meet mockery with venom or to forge a different path altogether. The weight of the day pressed heavily on J.D. as he stepped quietly into his hotel room, the distant murmur of the city muffled by thick walls, the relentless buzz of his phone, the storm of social media and advisors' debates seemed to fade the moment he saw her, his wife Ellie, waiting with a calm presence that no campaign chaos could shake. She didn't say anything at first. Instead, she took his hand gently, a quiet anchor amid the storm swirling inside him. JD sank onto the worn couch, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. For a long moment, words eluded him. Then Ellie spoke softly, her voice steady and filled with an understanding only years of partnership could foster. "JD," she said, "your strength isn't in matching their cruelty. It's in rising above it, in holding on to who you truly are when the world tries to tear you down." Her words, simple yet profound, stirred something deep inside him. The anger that had simmered all day, the urge to strike back hard and fast, began to lose its grip. Instead, a cautious hope took root. The idea that dignity and grace might be more powerful weapons than bitterness and retaliation. Ellie reached over and pulled up the clip on her phone. "Let's watch it again," she suggested. "But this time, let's really listen." They sat close together in the quiet room, the glow of the screen illuminating their faces. This time, JD heard not just the sarcasm and the sharp jabs, but something beneath, a reflection of frustration, of disappointment, even of fear. Kimmel's humor, harsh as it was, seemed fueled by more than mere mockery. It was a response to broken promises, to the pain felt by so many who saw their hopes dashed and their lives upended. As the studio laughter echoed through the speakers, JD found himself grappling with a difficult question. Was Jimmy mocking him personally, or was he mocking the symbol JD had come to represent? The struggles of communities left behind? The unfulfilled dreams of countless Americans? He turned to Ellie, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is he really mocking me, or the broken promises I represent?" Ellie nodded slowly. "Maybe it's both. But what matters is what you choose to do with it. You can't control their words, only your response." The room grew still again, but JD felt a shift inside, a tentative opening where clarity might begin to grow. For the first time, he allowed himself to see beyond the sting of insult, to glimpse the broader story unfolding beneath the headlines. They talked late into the night, peeling back layers of anger, frustration, and hope. Ellie reminded him of the boy who once vowed to be strong enough to protect his family, the man who had risen from hardship, not through bitterness, but through resilience. That night, JD's restless mind began to settle. The choice before him was no longer just about politics or image. It was about embodying the kind of strength that inspired others, even those who opposed him. The strength to listen, to reflect, and perhaps to forgive. As dawn crept over the city skyline, JD Vance sat with a quiet resolve, ready to face the coming storm not with fire, but with something far more enduring: grace. The afternoon sunlight filtered softly through the curtains of JD Vance's modest family home as his son, Ethan, came rushing through the front door. His small face was flushed, eyes wide with confusion, and something deeper: hurt. "Daddy," he blurted out, dropping his backpack by the door. "Why do people say you're bad? At school, they called you names and said you don't care about us." JD's heart tightened, a pang sharper than any political jab he had endured. He knelt to meet Ethan's gaze, brushing a strand of hair from his son's forehead. The room around them felt suddenly smaller, the distance between campaign stages and dinner tables shrinking into a raw moment of truth. "It's complicated, buddy," JD began softly, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes people don't understand what someone really stands for. They hear stories or see pictures, but those don't tell the whole truth." Ethan's brow furrowed. "But they laugh when they say mean things. Why would they do that?" JD swallowed, realizing this was more than politics. It was about the example he set for his children, about teaching them what strength and integrity truly mean. Sometimes people use words to hurt when they don't know how else to express their feelings. But it's important to remember who you are, not just what others say about you. Ethan looked down, fiddling with the hem of his shirt. "I want to be proud of you, Dad. I want my friends to know you're good." JD pulled his son close, voice steady but warm. "And you should be proud, because being good doesn't mean never making mistakes. It means trying to do what's right, even when it's hard. It means standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves." The boy nodded slowly, eyes brightening with understanding. "So it's not about what people say, but what you do." "That's right," JD replied, a quiet smile breaking through the weight in his chest. "Actions matter more than words." In that moment, JD felt the true gravity of his role, not just as a politician, but as a father shaping the world his son would inherit. The mockery was no longer just an attack on his campaign or character. It was a challenge to the legacy he wanted to leave behind. As Ethan ran off to play, JD remained seated, the echoes of his son's questions lingering in the room. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with public battles, but this private moment grounded him. It reminded him that beyond headlines and hashtags, his greatest responsibility was to live a life worthy of his family's pride and hope. The day's turmoil had shifted, from political war zone to a father's quiet resolve to be the man his son could believe in, no matter what the world said. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of an old clock perched high on the wall of J.D. Vance's study. Outside, the city of Washington, D.C. lay under a velvet blanket of night, the distant glow of street lamps dim and unobtrusive. But inside, the weight pressing on J.D.'s shoulders was anything but light. The relentless noise of the day, the viral clip, the biting headlines, the swirling social media storm, had faded, leaving a heavy quiet that filled the room. Before him lay a neat stack of letters from constituents. Each letter was a small window into lives touched by his work, hopes pinned on his promises, and fears whispered in ink on fragile paper. J.D. picked one up carefully. A letter from a veteran, its edges worn and the paper slightly crumpled, as if carried in a pocket through long days and restless nights. He unfolded the letter slowly, his eyes scanning the carefully written words. The veteran spoke plainly, but with heartfelt conviction. "I believed in you. Don't prove them right." Those words echoed louder in the stillness than any broadcast voice or social media post. The weight of that faith settled deeply in J.D.'s chest, a mix of pride and an almost suffocating sense of responsibility. He set the letter down gently and reached for his journal, a leather-bound book worn at the edges, its pages filled with raw thoughts and reflections, penned in quiet moments between the chaos. He picked up a pen and began to write. The scratch of ink on paper was a comforting sound in the silence, steady and deliberate. With each sentence, J.D. peeled back layers of the day's turmoil. The anger he had felt, the sting of humiliation, the doubts that threatened to overwhelm. But beneath it all, he wrote of a growing resolve, a determination not to be defined by mockery or public scorn. As he poured out his thoughts, the emotions he had kept tightly controlled began to surface. His hand trembled slightly as tears welled in his eyes, blurring the words before him. For a long moment, J.D. allowed himself to simply feel the loneliness, the pressure, the sheer weight of expectation. In that quiet surrender, something shifted. The tears became not a sign of weakness, but a release, a cleansing. He saw clearly now that leadership was not about invincibility, but about embracing vulnerability with courage. It was about carrying the hopes of others even when the burden felt unbearable. The veteran's letter, simple yet profound, had become a beacon. It reminded J.D. why he had embarked on this journey, not for personal glory, but to serve those who had placed their trust in him. The road ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, but the letter's message was clear. He must rise above the noise and meet the moment with integrity. As the night deepened, J.D.'s journal grew thick with words, promises, fears, hopes, all woven together into a tapestry of determination. The room, once heavy with silence, now seemed filled with a quiet strength born from reflection and acceptance. When the first pale light of dawn began to seep through the window, J.D. closed his journal and took a deep breath. The path before him was daunting, but his purpose was clearer than ever. He was not just fighting for himself or a campaign. He was carrying the dreams of those who had believed when few others did. And in that moment, alone with his conscience, J.D. Vance found the courage to face whatever lay ahead, not with anger or retaliation, but with a renewed spirit of grace and resolve. J.D. Vance sat at his desk, the glow of a single desk lamp casting a warm circle of light amid the shadows of his study. The night was deep and quiet, a stark contrast to the storm raging just days before. After endless debates with advisors urging him to strike back, to deliver a fierce rebuttal, J.D. had reached a different conclusion, one that surprised even himself. No comeback speech, no angry tweets, no fiery public declarations. Instead, he felt compelled to respond with something far rarer in politics: humility and gratitude. He pulled out a blank sheet of stationery, its crisp surface intimidating in its purity. The first words were difficult to write, His pen hovered hesitantly, searching for the right tone. It felt awkward, foreign even, to thank the man who had so publicly mocked him. But beneath the awkwardness lay honesty. Slowly the words began to flow. "Thank you for reminding me to be better than the moment." That sentence, simple yet profound, captured everything JD wanted to say. It acknowledged the pain, the challenge, and the opportunity all at once. It was a recognition that true strength wasn't measured by how loudly one fought back, but by the grace with which one faced adversity. As he continued, JD wrote about the power of accountability, how humor, even when sharp, could serve as a mirror, reflecting truths that were hard to see otherwise. He expressed his commitment to rise above personal attacks, to remain focused on serving those who depended on him. The act of writing transformed his thoughts from reactive fury into deliberate reflection. Each line was a step toward reclaiming control, not over the narrative alone, but over himself. Once the letter was complete, JD read it over, then again, searching for anything that might sound insincere or defensive. Finding none, he folded the paper carefully, slid it into an envelope, and sealed it with a quiet resolve that filled the room. This letter was more than a response. It was a declaration of character. It marked a turning point, not just in a political campaign, but in the man himself. JD leaned back, the weight of the decision settling comfortably on his shoulders. The path ahead would be challenging, but he now walked it with a strength born not from confrontation, but from quiet courage. Outside, the city began to stir with the first hints of dawn. Inside, a new day was dawning within J.D. Vance's heart, one shaped by grace, humility, and the resolve to be better than the moment. J.D. Vance's study was quiet, the soft glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows across scattered papers and unopened mail. His campaign team had gathered earlier that day, their faces a mix of anxiety and determination. They had been preparing a fierce response to Jimmy Kimmel's biting monologue, crafting speeches and social media posts designed to strike back with equal force. But when JD finally spoke, his words stunned everyone. "Release the letter," he said calmly, his voice steady but resolute. The room fell silent. Some exchanged surprised glances, others leaned forward, waiting for explanation. JD's gaze was unwavering as he continued. "It's time we change the narrative, not with fire, but with grace." The letter in question was simple, handwritten on plain stationery. A note to Jimmy Kimmel thanking him for holding JD accountable in a way that forced reflection. It praised the power of humor to keep even the most powerful leaders humble, reminding everyone that laughter, even when sharp, has a place in a democracy. Once the letter was published, reactions came swiftly and from every corner. News outlets buzzed with confusion, curiosity, and admiration. Headlines questioned whether this was a political masterstroke or an unexpected act of humility. Talk shows replayed the letter, dissecting its tone and implications. Social media exploded, with hashtags like #GraceUnderFire and #VanceResponds trending as people debated the meaning behind the gesture. Some critics saw it as a clever tactic to disarm opponents, while others were genuinely moved by the sincerity that seemed to leap from JD's carefully penned words. The letter became a symbol, a rare example of civility amid the chaos of modern politics. As journalists reached out for comments, JD remained composed, letting the letter speak for itself. His team, initially skeptical, soon recognized the power of this unexpected approach. The letter shifted conversations, softened tensions, and opened doors that had long been shut by acrimony. The public, too, responded in kind. Messages of support poured into JD's office, from veterans who had served under fire to everyday Americans struggling to find their voice in a divided nation. Many expressed surprise and gratitude for a politician willing to meet criticism with thoughtfulness rather than retaliation. This moment marked a turning point not only in JD's campaign, but in how the nation viewed him. He was no longer just a target of mockery. He had become a figure of resilience and dignity. The handwritten letter, humble in appearance yet powerful in impact, reshaped the narrative, proving that sometimes the quietest voices can echo the loudest truths. News anchors across the country were quick to seize upon J.D. Vance's handwritten letter to Jimmy Kimmel, sparking spirited debates that played out in living rooms and newsrooms alike. Was this a calculated political move, a savvy effort to disarm critics and recast his image? Or was it an authentic gesture of humility, a rare glimpse of genuine grace in a world too often ruled by cynicism and rancor? Panels of experts dissected every phrase, every sentence, searching for clues beneath the carefully chosen words. Across television screens, voices questioned and praised, reflecting the polarized state of the nation itself. Some commentators hailed the letter as a masterstroke of statesmanship, a bold departure from the norm. Others were skeptical, wondering if this was merely another tactic to win votes. But amid the clamor, one thing was clear. The letter had captured public attention in a way no campaign speech or press release ever had. Meanwhile, JD's office was inundated with letters and messages, not from political donors or strategists, but from ordinary Americans. Blue-collar workers, veterans returning from distant battlefields, teachers nurturing the next generation, all wrote to express something deeper than political allegiance. They spoke of hope rekindled, of respect earned, and of a leader who had chosen to meet mockery not with bitterness, but with quiet dignity. One letter from a former steelworker described how JD's words reminded him of the dignity lost in the layoffs that devastated his town. Another, from a school teacher in rural Ohio, thanked JD for showing her students that leadership could be both strong and compassionate. These voices, humble yet powerful, echoed across the inbox and piled high on desks, weaving a tapestry of genuine connection. To feel the impact firsthand, JD took a step away from the Capitol's relentless glare and visited a small-town diner tucked away in the heart of his home state. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered, drawing the attention of patrons engaged in quiet conversation. News of his letter had preceded him, and as he made his way to a booth, the chatter hushed into a respectful silence. One by one, patrons nodded or offered quiet smiles, their gestures speaking volumes. An elderly veteran tipped his hat. A waitress paused with a warm look. Even strangers exchanged knowing glances. The applause that finally came was soft, sincere, and unhurried. A far cry from the raucous cheers of a political rally, yet somehow more meaningful. JD felt the weight of those moments settle over him like a balm. Here, beyond the bright lights and flashing cameras, the people who mattered most were acknowledging not just his words, but the man behind them. It was a reminder that leadership is not forged in studios or debate halls, but in the hearts of those we serve. As he sipped his coffee, JD allowed himself a quiet smile. The journey was far from over, and the road ahead still held many challenges. But for now, in this simple diner surrounded by familiar faces, he found something precious. Respect earned through grace, and a renewed sense of purpose that no viral clip or biting monologue could diminish. On a brisk evening, under the bright studio lights of his late-night show, Jimmy Kimmel sat behind his familiar desk, the usual playful smirk replaced by a more contemplative expression. The audience buzzed with anticipation, unaware that tonight's segment would veer sharply from comedy into something unexpectedly profound. Holding J.D. Vance's handwritten letter in his hands, Kimmel began to read aloud, his voice steady but tinged with a newfound seriousness. As he carefully articulated each word, the sharp edges of his earlier mockery softened. The letter was more than a simple note. It was a sincere acknowledgement of accountability, a recognition of humor's unique power to humble even the most steadfast figures. The words resonated in the studio, bridging a gap that seemed unbridgeable just days before. For a moment, the usual laughter was replaced by a hush. Kimmel paused, folding the letter gently and looking up at the audience with an honest, almost vulnerable gaze. "I didn't see that coming," he admitted softly. "Maybe I was too quick to judge." The admission struck a chord far beyond the walls of the studio. Viewers watching at home sensed the rare moment of humility, a break from the typical back and forth of political jabs and media spin. Across social platforms and news outlets, the clip of Kimmel's reading and reflection spread rapidly, igniting conversations about grace, respect, and the unexpected power of thoughtful response. Critics who had once eagerly seized on the opportunity to deepen divisions found themselves pausing, reconsidering the narrative. The tide of public opinion shifted as respect began to replace ridicule, and conversations took on a more hopeful tone. Instead of bitterness, there was curiosity. Instead of mockery, a cautious admiration. In the days that followed, Kimmel's words became a touchstone for those longing for civility in a fractured political landscape. The dialogue that had once been sharply adversarial now opened the door to understanding. Through his heartfelt acknowledgement, Kimmel inadvertently became part of a larger story, one about the possibility of reconciliation and the enduring strength found in humility. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance, watching the segment from afar, allowed himself a quiet moment of relief. The letter had done more than just reach Kimmel. It had begun to heal the wounds inflicted by public spectacle. It was a reminder that even in the harshest spotlight, humanity could still shine through. The studio lights dimmed on that evening, but the impact of that moment lingered, a testament to the unexpected power of grace and the fragile but vital possibility of change. In a world hungry for connection, J.D.'s handwritten words and Kimmel's open heart offered a glimpse of what might be achieved when pride gives way to understanding. J.D. Vance sat quietly in his office, the soft hum of the city outside filtering through the window. The weight of recent events pressed on him, but with it came a new sense of clarity and purpose. The letter he had sent to Jimmy Kimmel had done more than shift public opinion. It had opened a door. Now it was time to take a step beyond words. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he had saved weeks ago, but never thought he'd call. After a few rings, the familiar voice answered, tinged with cautious curiosity. "Jimmy, it's J.D.," he said simply. "I want to invite you to Ohio. Not for cameras, not for politics, just a day of service." There was a pause on the other end. Kimmel, known for his sharp wit and skepticism, hesitated. "A day of service? What exactly are you proposing?" "No fanfare," J.D. replied firmly. "No speeches, no reporters. Just two men working alongside everyday folks who've been through a lot. I want you to see the places and people that shaped me, and maybe we can start understanding each other better." Kimmel's tone softened, intrigued despite himself. "I'm not sure what to make of this, but okay, let's do it." Word of the invitation leaked quickly. The media buzzed with speculation. Was this a genuine olive branch or a calculated publicity stunt? Headlines questioned motives. Pundits debated possible outcomes. In social media lit up with divided opinions. Some hailed it as a groundbreaking step toward healing political divides, while others dismissed it as a cynical ploy. Despite the swirling noise, both men prepared quietly. The date was set for a crisp autumn morning in Ohio, where J.D.'s roots ran deep. The plan was simple: spend the day helping at a local food bank, visiting community centers, and engaging with residents facing economic hardships. As J.D. and Kimmel arrived separately, the atmosphere was tense but hopeful. Local volunteers greeted them with cautious smiles, aware of the cameras that might have been but weren't. The absence of media gave the encounter a rare authenticity. The two men met briefly, a nod of acknowledgement passing between them, a silent agreement to set aside past conflicts for the day's work. They donned gloves and rolled up their sleeves, diving into the tasks at hand. They packed boxes of food, sorted donations, and listened intently to stories shared by families who had faced job losses, health crises, and uncertainty. The simplicity of the work contrasted sharply with the complexity of their public personas. Throughout the day, moments of awkwardness gave way to genuine connection. Shared laughter over clumsy mishaps, quiet reflections during breaks, and honest conversations about their differing perspectives slowly bridged a divide that once seemed insurmountable. By the time the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the Ohio landscape, the tension had eased. Kimmel admitted, "I came here expecting to find reasons to keep my distance. Instead, I found people who reminded me why this country is worth fighting for." J.D. smiled, feeling the weight of the day's journey lighten. Sometimes you have to step away from the noise to find the truth. As they parted ways that evening, no grand announcements were made. No cameras captured staged smiles or rehearsed speeches. Instead, there was something more profound, a quiet understanding that progress begins with openness, empathy, and the willingness to extend a hand. The day became a turning point, not just for J.D. and Kimmel, but for the countless Americans watching, hoping that even in the most divided times, common ground could still be found. J.D. Vance and Jimmy Kimmel arrived early at the local food bank, greeted by the hum of volunteers bustling about in preparation for the day's work. The morning light spilled through wide windows, illuminating stacked boxes of canned goods and fresh produce waiting to be sorted and distributed. The air carried a faint scent of cleaning supplies mingled with the hopeful chatter of community members preparing to receive help. At first, the atmosphere between JD and Jimmy was cautious, tinged with the awkwardness of two public figures navigating a fragile truce. They exchanged polite nods and brief smiles before rolling up their sleeves and joining the line of volunteers. Their hands moved quickly, lifting heavy boxes of rice, beans, and pasta from pallets and placing them carefully on tables for sorting. As they worked side by side, the weight of the day's purpose began to dissolve the tension. Jimmy cracked a small joke about his lack of experience with manual labor, eliciting a genuine chuckle from JD. The sound was light but meaningful, a sign that walls were beginning to come down. Later, they moved to serving meals at a crowded community center. Families lined up patiently, children clutching worn backpacks, mothers juggling toddlers, and elderly veterans quietly waiting their turn. JD and Jimmy handed out plates filled with warm food, taking moments to offer smiles and words of encouragement. During a brief pause, they sat together on a worn bench outside, sharing stories of their upbringings. JD spoke softly about growing up in a small Ohio town, the struggles his family faced, and the promise he made to rise above hardship. Jimmy listened intently, recounting his own childhood in a bustling city, the challenges he encountered, and how humor became his refuge and tool for connection. Their conversation revealed unexpected common ground, a shared understanding of resilience, family, and the desire to make a difference. The barriers erected by politics and public personas slowly gave way to genuine human connection. As the day progressed, a young boy approached them shyly, his eyes bright but cautious. Holding out a small hand, he said quietly, "Thank you for helping today. You made it feel good." The simplicity of the child's words struck both men deeply. In that moment, the purpose of their journey crystallized, not about politics or headlines, but about touching lives and restoring hope. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as volunteers packed the final boxes and cleaned the space. JD and Jimmy stood together, the fatigue of the day visible but overshadowed by a quiet satisfaction. Walking away from the food bank, their steps were lighter and their conversation more relaxed. The day of service had not erased their differences, but it had opened a door to understanding, an invitation to bridge divides through empathy and shared purpose. For J.D. Vance and Jimmy Kimmel, the experience was more than symbolic. It was a beginning, a powerful reminder that beneath the noise of political battles and media spin, humanity endures and connection remains possible. J.D. Vance and Jimmy Kimmel sat side by side in a small, unadorned studio room, the glow of soft lights casting warm shadows on their faces. Gone were the usual barriers, the sharp headlines, the biting monologues, and the relentless political noise. Today, they were simply two men united by a shared desire to heal a divided nation. The script for their public service announcement was brief but powerful. J.D. read the opening lines with a calm sincerity. "We live in a time when differences can seem overwhelming, where disagreement too often leads to division." Jimmy followed, his voice steady but warm. "But what if we chose another path? What if we remembered that disagreement doesn't have to mean dislike?" As the cameras rolled, the men spoke candidly, their words carrying the weight of experience and the hope for change. They acknowledged their past conflicts openly, not shying away from the tension, but embracing it as part of their journey. "We've been on opposite sides of many debates," JD admitted, "but today we want to show that respect can bridge even the widest gaps." Jimmy nodded in agreement. "It's a reminder that beyond politics and personalities, we're all Americans, bound by common hopes and shared futures." Their message was clear and simple. Disagreement is natural, but it need not destroy the bonds that hold communities together. When the video was released online, it struck a chord. Within hours, it spread like wildfire across social media platforms, picked up by news outlets and shared by millions. Civic groups posted it as a teaching tool, encouraging dialogue in communities fractured by partisanship. Schools incorporated it into lessons on citizenship and empathy, showing students that respect and understanding are foundational to democracy. Religious leaders across denominations cited the message in sermons and community gatherings, emphasizing the moral imperative to love and listen even when opinions clash. The video's impact rippled beyond politics, touching hearts in homes, workplaces, and places of worship. Comments poured in from viewers across the spectrum, people tired of division, inspired by the possibility of unity. "This is what we need more of," wrote one user. "Proof that we can disagree without being enemies." Another shared, "Seeing JD and Jimmy come together gives me hope for my own family and community." Behind the scenes, JD and Jimmy watched the response unfold with a mixture of humility and resolve. They knew the road ahead was long and uncertain, but the video was a step, a beacon signaling that even deep divides could be bridged by respect and open hearts. As the campaign around the PSA grew, JD and Jimmy found themselves invited to speak at events together, their joint appearance a symbol of reconciliation. The media dubbed it the handshake that politics forgot, highlighting how two men from vastly different worlds had chosen collaboration over conflict. One evening, after a community gathering, JD and Jimmy stood quietly outside, away from the flashing cameras and cheering crowds. Without words, they shook hands, a simple, deliberate act that spoke volumes. It was a silent pact of respect, a mutual acknowledgement of the journey they'd undertaken and the hope they carried forward. In that handshake was a message more profound than any speech or headline. Progress begins not in grand gestures or fiery rhetoric, but in small acts of understanding and the courage to reach across divides. As they parted ways, the evening sky deepened into twilight, the city's hum a gentle reminder of the lives touched by their message. For JD Vance and Jimmy Kimmel, this was not the end, but a new beginning, one forged in respect, empathy, and the shared belief that a divided nation could find its way back to unity. JD Vance's handwritten letter to Jimmy Kimmel had become more than a moment in political history. It had sparked a transformation across communities and conversations nationwide. In classrooms from Ohio to California, teachers carefully placed copies of the letter on their desks, using it as a catalyst for lessons about civics, respect, and the power of grace. Students listened attentively as educators unfolded the story behind the words, emphasizing how leadership isn't just about winning arguments, but about embodying humility and courage even in the face of criticism. In churches and community centers, pastors and faith leaders quoted the letter in sermons, weaving its message into teachings on forgiveness, empathy, and reconciliation. Their voices carried the weight of tradition while urging congregations to embrace compassion over division. The letter's resonance echoed through hymns, prayers, and shared stories, inspiring people to reflect on the deeper meaning of strength in their daily lives. Meanwhile, talk shows that once reveled in scandal and sharp political attacks began to shift tone. Hosts and commentators engaged in thoughtful discussions about the role of grace and humility in public life, debating how JD's response had challenged the usual narrative of retaliation. Viewers noticed the change. Segments now featured experts and citizens alike, exploring how kindness could become a political act and how civility might heal fractured communities. Amid this cultural shift, JD himself visited a local high school. Entering a bright, bustling classroom filled with eager teenagers, he was greeted with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. As he shared his journey, his struggles, his doubts, and his decision to respond with grace rather than anger, a young student raised her hand. "How did you stay kind when they were mean?" she asked, her voice steady but full of genuine wonder. JD paused, considering the question deeply. "It wasn't easy," he admitted. "There were moments I wanted to fight back, to defend myself with harsh words. But I realized that strength isn't about returning pain with pain. True strength is choosing how you respond when no one is watching, when the temptation to be bitter is strongest." The classroom fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the students. A few nodded thoughtfully, some scribbled notes, and others looked at him with newfound respect. As JD walked the halls of the school later, he reflected on the power of that question. It was a reminder that the lessons born from his experience were already taking root, inspiring a generation to consider leadership not as dominance, but as service and resilience. Back in the broader world, the letter's influence continued to ripple. Community forums echoed with discussions on forgiveness. Online platforms hosted conversations on bridging divides. Families shared stories of how the message helped heal personal conflicts. Across the nation, people began to see that political opponents could be more than enemies, that empathy and understanding could pave a way forward. JD's campaign office received letters and emails daily, messages from people whose lives had been touched by the story. Veterans spoke of finding renewed hope. Parents described teaching their children about kindness in adversity. Activists urged leaders to follow JD's example. The conversation was changing, not just about politics, but about the very heart of what it meant to lead, to listen, and to care. As the sun set over the Capitol, JD sat quietly in his office, the glow of his computer screen reflecting the faces of those who had written to him. The journey was far from over, but the path was clearer. Through the power of grace and the courage to choose kindness, a nation fractured by division might begin to heal. JD Vance stepped onto the modest stage of a small-town community center, greeted by a room filled with faces once etched with skepticism and distrust. The atmosphere was different now, less charged, more open. Months earlier, this very crowd had greeted him with boos and jeers, their voices rising against his policies and persona. Today, many sat quietly, listening intently, their eyes searching for understanding rather than confrontation. The town hall meetings had become places of genuine dialogue. Residents shared their struggles, lost jobs, healthcare worries, and fractured families, while JD responded not with rehearsed rhetoric, but with empathy and honesty. His tone was softer, his words deliberate, reflecting a man who had weathered storms, both public and private, and emerged with a renewed sense of purpose. Among those in the audience were veterans who had faced battles far from home, their own scars a testament to sacrifice and resilience. They watched as JD spoke candidly about leadership and responsibility, recognizing in him a rare moral courage. At one such gathering, a local veterans organization formally honored him, not for political victories, but for embodying integrity in the face of adversity. JD accepted the recognition quietly, aware that this respect was hard-earned. It was a reminder that true leadership transcended party lines in media narratives. It was about standing for values that connected rather than divided, listening when others shouted, and building bridges where walls once stood. As the weeks passed, JD reflected deeply on the journey that had brought him here. He understood now that gratitude, expressed not just in words but in actions, had the power to break down barriers that anger and retaliation only solidified. The letter to Jimmy Kimmel, the invitation for a day of service, and the joint messages had all been steps toward healing wounds that ran far deeper than politics. In quiet moments, JD thought about the families he had met along the way, the stories they had shared, and the hope rekindled in their eyes. He recognized that the path forward was neither easy nor quick, but it was necessary. Anger might capture headlines, but gratitude captured hearts. The transformations he witnessed in towns and cities across the state were proof that a different kind of politics was possible, one rooted in respect, empathy, and the courage to rise above the fray. JD's role was no longer just to fight for votes or power, but to inspire a collective belief in a better way forward. Standing once more before a crowd, JD felt a quiet strength emanate from the room. The walls of hostility had softened, replaced by tentative trust and a shared commitment to community. It was a testament to the enduring power of humility and the profound impact of choosing grace over grievance. As the event drew to a close, JD stepped off the stage with a renewed conviction. The journey of bridging divides was ongoing, but every conversation, every handshake, and every moment of understanding marked progress. And in a nation so often defined by its conflicts, those small victories of connection shone brighter than any headline. The grand ballroom of the city's historic hotel was alive with soft chatter and the clinking of glasses as hundreds gathered for the annual charity gala. Elegant chandeliers cast a warm glow over the crowd, illuminating faces from all walks of life. Philanthropists, community leaders, activists, and everyday citizens united by a shared commitment to making a difference. Among them was J.D. Vance, dressed simply yet impeccably, standing quietly near the back as the event unfolded. J.D. had never sought the spotlight for its own sake. Tonight was no exception. When his name was announced as the recipient of the evening's humanitarian award, a ripple of applause swept through the room. The applause grew, filling the vast space with a chorus of respect and admiration. Yet J.D.'s expression remained humble, his hands folded calmly as he made his way to the stage. Taking the microphone, J.D.'s voice was steady, but carried the weight of a man who had traveled a long, difficult road. "Thank you," he began, nodding toward the audience. "But the real heroes are not those who receive awards or stand on stages. The real heroes are those who choose hope when it's hardest to find it, those who wake up every day facing struggles unseen and keep moving forward." His words resonated deeply, evoking quiet nods and heartfelt murmurs throughout the crowd. J.D. spoke of communities rebuilding after loss, of families enduring hardship with resilience, and of the countless individuals whose courage often went unnoticed. "It's their strength that fuels any change we hope to achieve," he said, eyes sweeping the room with genuine gratitude. Then, to the surprise of many, Jimmy Kimmel stepped onto the stage beside him. The late-night host's usual playful demeanor was replaced by a sincere warmth. The audience's applause shifted into an expectant hush as Kimmel raised a hand. "I know we've had our differences," Kimmel began, glancing at J.D. with respect. "But tonight I want to say something important. J.D. Vance taught me too. He showed me the power of listening, the courage it takes to respond with grace instead of anger, and the strength in choosing unity over division." The crowd erupted into applause once again, louder this time and filled with emotion. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Others stood in ovation, moved by the unexpected reconciliation unfolding before them. J.D. and Jimmy exchanged a meaningful look, one that spoke of battles fought and bridges built. As the applause continued, J.D. nodded in acknowledgement, a quiet smile touching his lips. This moment, more than any campaign victory or viral video, symbolized the true potential of leadership and the possibility of change. As the event moved forward, stories of J.D.'s journey circulated among guests, inspiring conversations about forgiveness, humility, and the lasting impact of kindness. The award was not just a recognition of his efforts, but a celebration of the values he embodied, values that resonated far beyond politics. Later that evening, as J.D. left the ballroom, the echoes of applause still ringing in his ears, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. It had been marked by challenges and criticisms, but also by moments of profound growth and unexpected connection. He knew the work was far from over, yet he felt fortified by the knowledge that even in a divided world, grace and respect could triumph. And sometimes the most meaningful victories were those won quietly, with humility and hope. J.D. Vance sat alone in the quiet of his home, the soft flicker of an old television screen casting a gentle glow across the room. The familiar scenes of his childhood played out before him. Grainy footage of family gatherings, birthday celebrations, and simpler times marked by laughter and love. Despite the hardships that lingered just beneath the surface, each frame was a vivid reminder of a life forged in struggle, but sustained by resilience and hope. His fingers traced the edges of a faded photograph resting on the coffee table, a snapshot of a younger J.D. standing in front of a modest house, eyes full of determination and dreams. Beside it lay the handwritten letter he had sent to Jimmy Kimmel, the same letter that had sparked a journey of reflection, grace, and unexpected reconciliation. Together, these two images, one from the past, one from a pivotal moment, formed a powerful symbol of transformation. As the video continued to play, J.D.'s mind wandered through the milestones that had shaped him. The small Ohio town where he grew up, the challenges of poverty, the unwavering support of his mother, and the promises he made to himself to rise above circumstance. The memories were bittersweet, a tapestry woven with threads of pain and perseverance. He recalled the long nights spent studying, the quiet moments of doubt, and the fierce resolve that carried him through each setback. The letter had become more than words on paper. It was a testament to the man he had chosen to become, a man committed not only to politics, but to humanity, to listening, and to leading with integrity. JD reached out and gently framed the letter alongside the childhood photo, placing them side by side on the mantel. The juxtaposition was striking, a visual narrative of growth, of a journey from vulnerability to strength. It was a silent declaration of identity, a reminder that while the past shaped him, it did not define his future. The room was still except for the soft hum of the television and the distant sounds of the city settling into night. JD's gaze lingered on the framed memories, and for the first time in a long while, a quiet sense of triumph filled the space. Not the loud, boastful kind, but the kind born from enduring trials and choosing grace. He thought of the countless people whose lives intersected with his own, the veterans who found hope in his words, the teachers who shared his story with their students, the everyday Americans who saw in him a reflection of their own struggles and dreams. Their faith had become a guiding light, a responsibility he carried with humility. In that moment, JD understood that true victory was not measured by headlines or political wins, but by the ability to stay true to oneself amidst adversity. The letter and the photograph were more than keepsakes. They were beacons, symbols of a promise fulfilled, a legacy in the making. As the night deepened, JD sat back, letting the weight of the journey settle around him. The path ahead remained uncertain, but the foundation was solid. He was a man who had faced mockery and doubt, who had chosen kindness over retaliation, strength over bitterness. And in that quiet room, surrounded by memories of who he was and who he had become, JD Vance found a peace that no public spectacle could shake, a triumph both personal and profound. Across the country, JD Vance's journey from ridicule to grace began to inspire a new wave of leaders and communities eager for change. In a small Midwestern town, a young political candidate stood before a packed hall, nervously clutching notes but speaking with growing confidence. "I owe my courage to JD Vance," she declared. "He showed us that strength isn't about fighting fire with fire, but about choosing grace when it's hardest." Her words rippled through the crowd, sparking hopeful conversations about a different kind of leadership, one grounded in empathy and humility. Schools began to incorporate grace under fire into their curricula, introducing students to the idea that true strength comes from kindness amid adversity. Civics teachers displayed JD's handwritten letter on classroom walls, prompting discussions about accountability, respect, and the power of thoughtful response. In libraries and community centers, book clubs and discussion groups formed around themes drawn from his story, engaging citizens across generations and political lines. Bipartisan initiatives took root as well. Legislators from both parties, inspired by JD's example, introduced bills promoting civic education focused on empathy and respectful dialogue. Town halls began emphasizing listening sessions and community healing over confrontation. News outlets highlighted these efforts as signs of a slowly healing political landscape, a testament to the enduring impact of a single act of grace. At a high school graduation ceremony in Ohio, JD stood behind the podium, looking out at a sea of young faces filled with anticipation and possibility. The auditorium buzzed with energy, a blend of excitement for the future and reflection on the journey that had led them here. Taking a deep breath, JD began, "Courage isn't loud. It's choosing kindness when pride begs for revenge. It's finding the strength to listen, even when it's easier to shout." His words settled over the crowd like a gentle wave, inviting contemplation rather than applause. He spoke of the challenges ahead, divisions that still ran deep and voices that still raised walls rather than bridges. Yet he also spoke of hope, hope born from those who dare to choose grace, who refuse to be defined by conflict, and who understand that leadership is as much about humility as it is about conviction. A young woman in the front row wiped a tear from her cheek, while a veteran in the back nodded solemnly, feeling the truth of JD's message resonate with his own experiences. Parents exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the importance of teaching the next generation that strength and kindness are not opposites but allies. As the ceremony concluded, JD stepped down from the stage, his heart full but mindful of the journey still ahead. The ripples of his story were growing, touching lives, shaping minds, and quietly shifting the tides of a nation hungry for unity and understanding. J.D. Vance stepped quietly onto the Capitol steps as the first light of dawn began to paint the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. The city was hushed, wrapped in a peaceful stillness that contrasted sharply with the noise of the day before. The streets were empty, and the only movement came from a gentle breeze that caused the American flag above to ripple softly against the early morning sky. As J.D. paused halfway down the steps, he took a deep breath and looked out over the city that had become both his home and his battleground. The monumental buildings stood silent and dignified in the quiet, and the weight of all the moments, both public and private, that had led him here settled heavily but calmly within him. The fight he had faced in the public eye, the challenges of leadership, and the moments of self-doubt were all part of a greater battle, a struggle within himself to remain true to his values and act with integrity amid chaos and division. He thought about the letter he had written, the unexpected response from Jimmy Kimmel, and the journey that followed, a path marked not by anger but by grace, not by division but by a willingness to understand and to forgive. For a moment, J.D. allowed himself to feel the quiet victory of this journey. It was not the kind of triumph that comes with applause or headlines, but a deeper, more enduring peace born of choosing dignity over bitterness. As the flag above continued to flutter in the breeze, J.D. whispered softly, "In the end, the fight worth having is the one with yourself, and winning means walking away at peace." With renewed resolve, he continued down the steps, the city slowly waking around him. The soft sounds of early commuters, birdsong, and distant conversations began to fill the air, blending with the hope that the new day held. J.D. knew the challenges ahead were many, but in this moment, surrounded by the quiet strength of dawn, he carried a calm certainty. The greatest victories are not measured in political wins or public acclaim, but in the courage to face oneself honestly and to choose peace above all else. As he disappeared into the awakening city, the scene faded gently to black, leaving behind a lasting impression of resilience, humility, and the profound power of grace. This story reminds us that true strength lies not in retaliation, but in grace. J.D. Vance's journey teaches us the power of choosing kindness over anger, even when faced with harsh criticism. It's a hopeful message about resilience, humility, and the courage to rise above division. In a world often driven by conflict, this tale invites us to reflect on how we respond to adversity. How do you find strength in difficult moments? Have you ever turned a challenge into an opportunity for growth? If this story touches you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to JD Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching JD Stories.